Oh no, it's happening again. It's happening again. It's Volume 3 of the worst tank concepts of World War II. The third one. Well, you all will be happy to know that the Soviets are making their return to the spotlight.
No!
In this case, they're doing it with the T-585. This was another one of those programs that really could only happen in the Soviet Union. This project began work in 1944, and the idea was to take captured Panther tanks and increase their service life by refitting them with Soviet 85mm cannons. It was part of a larger program that was set to rearm 4 different German vehicles, one being the Panzer IV, the Panther, the Tiger I, and even briefly the King Tiger. Now, it may not sound like anything that's remotely possible, but amazingly, the Soviet ZIS S-53 actually was nearly a perfect fit for the Panther tank turret, and even allowed the elevation and depression to be pretty much identical to the KWK-42. However, this is where its good points end. One of the big issues with this conversion was the amount of time it would take to do it. It would take 120 hours of back-breaking work to put the 85mm gun in the turret. There was also the issue that the 85mm gun actually performed much worse than the German 75mm KWK-42, which ultimately meant that they were downgrading the vehicle to keep it in service. And once they had done that, they still had to battle the issues of the Panther tank, because no consideration was made to replace either the engine or transmission, and especially the final drives, which made field repairs almost impossible due to crew inexperience and lack of parts. There's also the issue that it relies simply on captured Panther tanks, which, how are you supposed to capture those in any kind of regular intervals? It's just not a sustainable strategy. And finally, the Soviets eventually came to the same conclusion that probably you have already, which is, why not just simply continue using the T-34-85 and not worry about using foreign equipment? And that is exactly what happened, because in spring 1945, in spite of some members of the High Command still viewing it favorably, the project was cancelled. Now, of course, it wouldn't be a worst tank concepts of World War II video without at least one German vehicle in it. This one being the VK65.01H. Just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? This project began as a result of a meeting on January 19th, 1939. It was intended to be the heavier counterpart of the newly designed VK30.01H. The vehicle was going to be armed with a 75mm gun, after it was deliberated that the majority of the vehicle's weight should come from its armor and not its armament. The vehicle was designed as a multi-turreted vehicle, and would have 80mm thick armor.
Nope.
The power would come from a Maybach HL224 engine producing 592 horsepower, giving the vehicle a blistering top speed of 12.5 miles an hour. The turret was to be nearly identical to the VK30.01H, except that the armor was going to be thicker.
I like them chunky. I like them big. I like them plumpy.
And the 75mm gun that it was going to use was initially planned to be the 75mm KWK L40, but this was changed to the L24 ultimately for simplicity and better infantry support. And now that we have covered the background, let's cover the reason why you have likely never heard of this program. One of the biggest issues that was seen already at the start of it was how big the vehicle was going to be. In fact, it was so big that it actually exceeded Germany's railway profile restrictions, which meant that they had to come up with a very interesting fix to be able to transport it to the front. The vehicle would be broken down into 3 sections, transported to the front in 3 sections, and then reassembled at the front, which according to a couple sources I saw, said that it would take 3 days for an experienced crew to reassemble the vehicle. Only more bad news came into the project, though, when it was announced that the turrets for the vehicle would not be complete until 1942 at the earliest. And then, another death blow to the project was after the fall of France, it was decided that tanks weighing over 30 tons were too heavy and not useful due to not being able to pass most bridges. Boy, they sure did stay consistent with that issue throughout the war, didn't they? So as a result of all of this, the production order was canceled in August 1940 and all contracts were canceled. In spite of this, work on the trial turret continued until October 1940 when it was eventually stopped. In 1941, it was reported that one soft steel trial chassis was being completed. However, work completely officially stopped on the program with the introduction and prioritization of the VK45.01H. Henschel was then given permission in the end of 1942 to completely scrap the prototype and all built components. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's yet again another channel first. This time, we are mocking the French. In particular, the FCM F1. This was a super heavy tank designed just prior to the outbreak of World War II to replace the mildly controversial Char 2C. The vehicle was not designed for tank-on-tank combat and was designed to attack enemy fortified lines. Armor protection was going to be 100mm at the thickest, and the vehicle was going to be 10.5 meters long, 3.1 meters wide, and 4.2 meters tall, and would be powered by two Renault KGM V12s producing 550 horsepower each, and would also use vertical coil suspension in order to help improve cross-country mobility. One of the most notable features of this vehicle is its very, unique multi-turret arrangement, which would have a 90mm DCA cannon in the largest turret, and a 47mm SA-37 cannon in the smaller turret. The multi-turret design was already out of date, though, by the time the vehicle was designed, but they went ahead with it anyway, because why not? The vehicle was expected to weigh 150 tons, which would make it pretty much impossible to maneuver in any kind of underdeveloped areas. And also, in spite of possessing 1,100 horsepower, the vehicle could only move at a predicted maximum speed of 12.5 miles an hour on a road. The project ended up being cancelled due to the invasion of France, which would definitely be a very reasonable reason to cancel your project. And a single wooden mock-up was completed, and the fate of which is unknown, but it's likely the Germans broke it up for firewood. Now, one thing that I have not seen ever mentioned with problems with this vehicle is the way the multi-turret is set up. By having the smaller turret at the front, with the 90mm cannon hanging directly above it. I just wonder how rough it would be for the guys in the small turret when the main cannon fires. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, we're covering yet another French tank, and I think, honestly, this one may be one of the worst tanks we've ever reviewed on the channel. That being the Renault UE 57. This tank was designed in Great Britain in 1943 by the Free French, who also completed a prototype of said vehicle. Unfortunately, the vehicle was already very crude from the start, due to the Free French not really having a lot of money to spend on the program. One of the biggest glaring issues of this vehicle was by the time the prototype was completed, it was already being viewed as totally obsolete. A single prototype was completed and was to serve as a template for future series production. However, that never happened due to trials proving, quote, disappointing, and further development was stopped. A single prototype was completed, which was then, hilariously enough, converted back into an artillery tractor because it was so bad. Now, I've noticed a lot of people don't talk about the actual problems with the design, so I would like to do that right here, right now. One major issue that I can already see with this thing is that there's no place for the crew to be sitting at the back of the gun while the vehicle is in transit. Instead, they have to ride inside the vehicle, which means the gun is totally unmanned, which presents a huge issue if you are ambushed. Another problem I can see is that I don't see any place to store ammunition on board, which would mean that you would have to have a separate vehicle following behind to carry the shells. There's also the fact that this heavy gun is at the very back of the vehicle, right above the idlers, which I can only assume would lead to increased wear on said idlers, leading to eventual premature failure. And finally, the biggest issue with this thing that nobody talks about is that it was expected to use Renault UE chassis. Well, the problem with that is the majority of Renault UEs are now in German hands. So, what do you have to do exactly? Do you recapture them from the Germans and then have to go through the lengthy conversion process in order to use them? I mean, did they not even consider that as a factor? Okay, well, that's it. Volume 3 is done. Boy, what were some of these people thinking, man? Like, what was the idea with some of these? Why were some of these things even allowed to be prototyped? Looking at you, Renault UE 57. I mean, it just baffles me how many programs like these existed that were just so out there and yet still managed to actually get funding for development. Just boggles the mind. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the video.
Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe.
And, I will see y'all in the next video. Ciao, I guess?